Good morning and welcome. We've got, it looks like a small group today. I think we had about 40 registered, so we may have some folks joining later. Let's see. Um, Welcome. We are talking this morning about designing with color through the lens of digital accessibility. I am Donna Murray. I serve as the Digital Accessibility Specialist at DPI. This is a fairly new role. I've been in this position for, goodness, almost 8 months now. Wow. And previously, before that, I was in digital teaching and learning at the agency for about the last 10 years. So I'm excited to now be serving in this role specifically around digital accessibility. And today's conversation will be about how color impacts accessibility. So we're in our session description. I mentioned that we're going to learn how to use color effectively, and we're also going to talk about how to avoid accessibility issues as it relates to color. So just a few housekeeping things. If you've not attended one of our webinars yet in this series, please know that these are fairly informal. Feel free at any point to throw a question in the chat or raise your hand or unmute to participate. But when you're not talking, please stay muted. Let's see. Yes, Melinda had a question about previous webinars. Yes, I will be posting the recording and transcript for today's webinar, as well as I'm trying to think of I don't think I've posted anything from July yet in the webinar recordings, but I will post them here. They're in chronological order, so you can go back and watch any of those. And let me know if you have any issues accessing those. So I will add July once I clean up the transcripts. Hopefully by the end of this week, I'll get all of those caught up. But I do have May and June's sessions there, as well as upcoming webinars. So there is captioning available in WebEx. Should be in the bottom left-hand corner, hopefully. And there's, again, the recording and transcript will be posted within the next few days. So to kind of set the stage to really identify the current landscape of website accessibility specifically, when we talk about color, that's going to be, for any type of digital content, but just to give you an idea of how color and accessibility issues with color are impacting the website landscape. There's an organization called WebAIM Million, and they take a look at the top 1 million most visited websites and do some automated accessibility testing. So kind of a quick glance at the accessibility of those websites. And they noted that in the most recent evaluation, which was in February, they noted that there's an average of almost 60 errors per page on those most visited 1 million websites that are out there. And when you look at the common types of accessibility failures, there's like 80% are missing alternative text for images. So that's a huge accessibility error that's happening across, almost the vast majority of websites out there. But following close in its footsteps is low contrast text. So it is a very common accessibility failure on websites, and I dare say on probably just about any type of digital content. So when we talk about color, we know that, obviously that there's some issues with accessibility out there, but let's talk about the role of color in design. I think we probably all recognize some of the ways that color impacts our day-to-day experiences. So it can do things like influence perception and behavior. There's tons of research and articles you can find out there about color psychology. It has the the ability to evoke emotions. It really helps with, drawing attention to something, even with just the idea of enhancing aesthetics and functionality. Think about branding. Color is used in branding and used for visual appeal, uh, and in addition to all of these things, it also obviously communicates some information. So think about when I'm, on a web page and there's either some sort of alert or some instructions, or I'm filling out a form and it prompts me to say you've missed a required field here. Typically that's in red, right? So it's somehow giving me some information, some feedback about where I am, or what, what I've not done yet. But additionally, things like just building out a hierarchy or organizing information. Typically, we rely on color to help us with that. So I don't think it surprises any of us when I say that color has a huge role in how we design. And this is an example. This is an image from Canva, where in an article that they have about color, and I have that linked in the resources, but I also have it linked directly to the image here on the slide. Oh, and I apologize. Let me throw the link. I have the shortcut link to the slide deck right here on the screen, but there's the direct link if you'd like to have that or bookmark it. So in Canva, they've highlighted some of those, examples of color choices by business logos. There's also another graphic on that page that identifies the logos for the top, like the Fortune 500. It's really interesting to see how many logos are red and blue as opposed to some of the others. And I think it said that there were no pink logos in the top 500. So it's just interesting. The geek in me has loved exploring about color psychology, and articles like the one from Canva are just very interesting to me about how folks select colors for their logos. But when we talk about color, we're really focused in on um, how different types of colors, how hue and saturation and brightness will play a part in accessibility. So we'll talk about that today as we explore some common accessibility issues and how to fix them. And so I just wanted to kind of set the stage with language I'm sure we're all used to, but just to help us kind of wrap our arms around, the definitions that relate to color. So the hue is the color itself. So when we think about red or blue or yellow or green, that's the color, that's hue. But the saturation is really about how weak or strong that color is. And then the luminance or brightness, how light or dark that is. So think about saturation and kind of adding gray to the mix. And then brightness is really about adding white to the mix. So obviously, as we're exploring how to ensure that we have appropriate color contrast, as we're looking at how colors relate to one another, then I think we're all familiar with the color wheels where we're selecting colors in our WYSIWYG editors when we're creating digital content. But essentially, these are the things that we're doing. We're either or selecting the hue, but we're also identifying how weak or strong we want that color to be, or how light or dark we want that to be. There are some set standards, and there's actually a new rule out for the Americans with Disabilities Act for state and local government that says this is the bar that's been set. This is the technical standard that has been set, that identifies clearly what the expectation is when we say something needs to be accessible. Some digital content needs to be accessible. So the web content standards here, and we're not digging deep into those today. That's its own session or sessions. But we're really going to be talking more specifically today about how we use color and how and about the color contrast. So I've referenced one of the WCAG standards here, 1.4.3, which is about contrast, and that's what we're going to talk about first. So there is a set ratio for minimum color contrast. So think about text on background. And the minimum uh, uh, for that contrast ratio between the text and the background is 4.5 to 1. And then for larger text, it's not as stringent. The contrast ratio needs to be at least 3 to 1. So we're going to demonstrate that and talk about, and actually give you a minute to maybe even test your own colors for one of your favorite websites, or maybe even a personal or a professional website of your own. But essentially, what we're looking for is a minimum contrast so that it's easy to distinguish and read the text of the text color versus that background color. So there's lots of of contrast color checkers, tools, extensions, websites where you can test color. There's add-ons where you can test color. There's website evaluation tools and that will have a contrast checker built in. We're going to look at a couple of these today, but just know that there's lots of others out there. These are just two very commonly used checkers and two that I use very often. So let me throw the direct link into this chat in case you don't have the slide deck pulled up. And I encourage you to take a look at that website as I'm explaining how this works, because then I'm going to ask you to try to test some colors again on a website of your choosing. So this website, the WebAIM contrast checker, will enable you to either type in the hex value, choose the color picker, and type in the RGB codes, or you can choose the eyedropper, and then you can see it zooms in, which makes it really easy to land on a color. And I can select a color by using the eyedropper. So that's the foreground. Let me expand this out a little bit. That's the foreground color. And then if I wanted to select a background color, let's say, for example, that the background color was this green right here. And you can see that in this instance, if I had black text on that green, just like it looks down here, it's failing that minimum contrast ratio. And I think you can agree, hopefully you agree, that this is difficult to read. I mean, I can read the 5 boxing wizards shop quickly, but it's difficult to read. There's not enough contrast between that text and that background. Now, it gives not examples, but some parameters. So if I talk about just normal sized text, it's failing the WCAG standards. If I'm talking about larger text, it's failing. And then also graphical objects or user interface components. So like this check mark right here, that on this green background, that icon, that graphic, it's even failing that. So this contrast ratio is too small. Now, if I manually, as I start kind of making that green lighter, notice that it's starting to pass the ratio over here. So as the contrast ratio increases past that 4.5 to 1 minimum, you can see that now it's saying that it passes. Now, I think an argument can be made for usability that bright green is kind of difficult to look at. But in terms of contrast ratio, there is enough contrast between that black text and that green. So I encourage you to take a moment. Again, I put the link into the chat for this resource, and I encourage you to either pull this up in a tab and then open another window and pull up your favorite website and take a moment to practice testing two colors. If you want to do it just right here within the web page that you're on, then maybe try this purple link color with the gray background, or maybe this red text on the gray background. Just try that out and see if you can check the color contrast between a text color and a background color and see what the ratio is and see if it passes for smaller text or normal size text, large text, or for graphical objects. And I'll throw that link in the chat again in case we had some folks who just joined us. So we'll take just a minute. You're just trying out the contrast checker. So again, you can either type in the hex value, type in the RGB value, or grab that eyedropper tool to find the text color. Obviously, the red text color that I picked on that green background is failing everything. I think that's pretty obvious that that's difficult to read. All right, so hopefully you've had a chance to just do some testing with your with some colors. Melinda's question, let's see, how do I find the color hex value on a page? So there are some tools that would allow you to, kind of similar to this, be able to um, to look at the color picker or to use a color picker of some sort to identify what the hex code is. Oftentimes, like, let me show you an example, like on Canva, for example. Let's just say I was in, come on. Just in Canva, for example. Oh, this is a video. That's not what I want. Let me just pull up, let me just pull up this slide deck. So in this instance, if I go into edit, I can click on like this text right here. And when I go into color, if I click on the plus symbol, it's letting me know the current hex code right here. Of course, it also has an eyedropper, so I can come in here and select a different color, and you can see that it was matching that color. So typically, the way I find hex codes is whatever color I've chosen, I just go into wherever it is that I can set the color, and typically the hex code is right there. And again, there are tools like the color picker that we're on, if I can get back to it, where it's got that eyedropper tool where it'll allow you to select a color and then let you know what the hex value is. So it's interesting to note that all of these colors, this text color with the background color, all of these are almost exactly that minimum contrast, 4.5 to 1. So I encourage you to reach beyond the minimum, because as you can see in these, you probably agree with me that all of these are somewhat difficult to read. I mean, the gray on white is not too bad, but that purple is so bright, and then this blue on that dark gray is just kind of difficult to read. And then, of course, this red on yellow is just, whew, not very visually appealing, and to me difficult to read, especially if there was a lot of text in those two colors. So the 4.5 to 1 is a minimum contrast, and I encourage us to kind of try to reach beyond that. This is another tool that allows you to do some color contrast checking. It's from Adobe. So I'm going to click on that and then throw that link into the chat in case you'd like to pull that up as well. Very similar to what we were just looking at with the WebAIM contrast checker. Similarly, it's demonstrating down below, similarly to the WebAIM tool, that it's showing me that for regular text, these two colors, this mustard and this turquoise color, fail for regular text, passes for larger text, and then passes for those graphical components like these icons here. But I love this tool specifically because it gives me some related colors, so kind of keeping the same color scheme, but with a higher contrast ratio. So in other words, if instead of this, not meeting the contrast ratio, I can still kind of stick with the mustard and the turquoise color, but if I apply these, you'll see that there's a greater contrast. So it's given me recommendations over to the side. So I appreciate that. I like that that's an option. You can also import colors. So you could actually, kind of along with what we were asking, um, that Melinda was asking about the color hex values, you can actually pull in a file from your computer and be able to have the colors pulled out so that you can, rather than having to look up the hex codes, it's going to find those colors. It's basically doing a color picking for you. um, so it's just another tool. There's different tools available to help with color checking, and the WebAIM is one. This is another one that I use often from Adobe, and we'll talk about another accessibility tool that's built right into this one in just a few minutes. Let's see, Bert, let's see, if the middle number is above 5, is that above standard for normal text? So you see it now. Okay. So the minimum is 4.5 to 1. In this case, of course, I'm over that 4.5, but it sounds like you've answered your own question, Bert. So just holler if you still need clarity. All right, so we've talked about and looked at a couple examples of tools that can help us with contrast check. The WebAIM tool, and then the Adobe Color. I do want to mention that when we're talking about a linked text, WebAIM also has another tool to check contrast. When we talk about checking link contrast checker, like in this example right here, the 5 boxing wizards jump quickly. Notice that the boxing wizards is in this brighter blue. When I hover over it, you'll see that it underlines. There isn't a color contrast minimum between the blue of the link and the surrounding black text. If you have the link not automatically, but if you have the link formatted to be underlined. So you know how when we're on a web page, like over here to the right here, you notice that all of these links over here are text that are already underlined. Notice even in the navigation, these links are already underlined. That denotes visually that it is a hyperlink. But if you're not going to underline your hyperlinks, then there's got to be enough contrast between the text and the hyperlink text so that it's easy to recognize that that is a hyperlink. So in most cases, you probably don't even need to worry about the contrast between these words and the surrounding text, because generally speaking, I think most of us, when we hyperlink, we underline. Typically, when we're adding hyperlinks in a, like in a Google Doc or something, it automatically underlines them as we hyperlink them. But it's just interesting to note that it is important to check the contrast between your linked text and the surrounding text, as well as, of course, to the background. So if you're not going to have that text automatically underlined. So the intent here is that there's got to be enough contrast between the three things, the link text, the body text, and the background, if you're going to meet the minimum requirement. So this is an example, excuse me, where the link color is the blue, the body text color is the black, and the background is white. And there's enough contrast between those three things to meet the minimum requirements. And so there's more information down here that talks about, exactly the minimum requirements. In this case, the link text, excuse me, has to have a 3-to-1 minimum ratio between this color and the surrounding text. Excuse me, y'all. Let me grab some coffee. My allergies are not happy this morning. So this is just another website that WebAIM has that really helps you with those color contrasts between your links and the surrounding text and background. Again, if you underline your hyperlinks, then you worry about the contrast between it and the surrounding text. Certainly, you still need to worry about the color of your links to the background, but you don't have to worry about this additional layer. So that's the link contrast checker. I don't know if I threw that link in the chat, so let me do that in case you'd like to bookmark that specific link. Okay. So we've talked just about color contrast, but now let's talk about how important it is to not rely on color alone when we're designing. So when we talk about color vision deficiencies or color blindness, there's I think 6 or 7, I can't remember, I think it's 7 different types of color blindness, but generally speaking, they could be lumped into one of these 3 categories. For these color vision deficiencies, it's typically an issue with distinguishing between red and green, blue and yellow, and some, not as common color blindness is color blindness that has access to no colors. So it's, there's lots of different types of color vision deficiencies, but it's pretty prevalent, especially in men. I think that may not be a stat that's surprising to you, but 1 in 12 men, so about 8% of the population, has some sort of color vision deficiency, as opposed to about 0.5% of women. So it's important for us to not only talk about color contrast, but to talk about the ability or the need to select colors that would be visually distinguishable for people who have color blindness. So that Adobe Color tool that we were just on, in the accessibility tools section where we are, there's a drop-down menu here on the left where I can go to colorblind safe. And so this allows me to select, I can come in here and it's defaulting to just some random colors here, but I can come in and put the hex codes, excuse me, good gracious, for various colors. So think about if I was going to be like creating a chart and all of the different bars on this bar chart are going to be different colors. I can come in here and put what those colors are going to be. And then down below, you'll see that it, for 3 types of color blindness, it simulates what those colors that I selected are going to appear to someone with those different types of color blindness. And so it's even denoting with this white line in the middle, it's even denoting which colors are going to be, really difficult to distinguish between. So if I don't have a color blindness, then this bright green as opposed to kind of this chartreuse color over here, these two are, for someone who doesn't have color blindness, might be visually distinguishable. But take a look down here at the colorblind simulators and notice how similar those 2 colors are. So if I don't have those bars labeled in my bar chart, in some way, shape, or fashion, either with some text or with some sort of pattern, it's going to be difficult to distinguish between those 2. So in this instance, the screenshot here, I took DPI's colors, so this navy blue and kind of this purple color, and then this turquoise color. And then in the colorblind simulator using the Adobe Color tool, notice that especially with this color blindness right here, these 2 blues are pretty similar. And then that third color is kind of periwinkle. So if I'm describing, especially like if I'm presenting and I say, take a look at this purple color here in the bar chart, if I'm not able to visually identify that or distinguish that purplish color, then it's going to be difficult to truly understand the content that I'm looking at. Certainly, if in web-based materials or printed materials, if I'm not distinguishing in an additional way, and I'm using all three of our DPI colors like on a chart, it's going to be difficult to distinguish that. So WCAG has another standard. Remember, we were talking about the WCAG standards. There's another standard, 1.4.1, that talks about use of color. And the standard here is that we should not rely on color alone to convey information. So just like I was mentioning, we want some other visual cue. So some sort of label, text, patterns, or maybe even multiple options of ways to distinguish that information. So this is just just a quick example of a chart that has bars with blue, orange, and gray, and you can see that they're categorized, and then the series are labeled down below. But again, you can't distinguish between the series if you can't distinguish between that blue, that orange, and that gray. So here's an example of how, using that same bar chart, if I added some semblance of, some sort of pattern, like in this one, I can't see exactly what that pattern is, but some sort of tight knit, either lines or dots, I can't tell from here. And then these more distinguishable lines, and then these dots on the gray. This helps me distinguish between the three. I'm still using my colors, but the pattern is adding an additional layer, so that if I have a visual impairment, a color vision impairment, I'm still able to distinguish. I gave another example here of like this go button. So if I'm on a web page and I have to submit a form, but the instructions say, click the green button to submit. If I can't distinguish between green and red or another color, then I'm not going to know which button to click. So instead, I've added a textual label to this that says go. And so my instructions might read something like, click the green go button to submit, or click the button that reads go to submit. And I don't even have to reference the color. What we use color for lots of things, and it might be that I think all of us would assume that the green button is the one that we need to hit if we're going to submit something. But being sure that we use some sort of textual or patterned in addition to the color is going to make it easier, honestly, for everyone to be able to know exactly what the information is sharing with them. So we've talked about two big things. One, don't rely on color alone. Two, make sure your color contrast meets that minimum ratio so that it's easily readable. But it's also important to note that when we're formatting text, don't rely on formatting alone. So, and I actually demonstrated that here on the screen. So in that first bullet, I put, don't use formatting alone. But what I did was I used formatting alone for this important point. I color coded the word alone to add emphasis to that. I've bolded the text to add emphasis, and that's fine to do, but instead of just using formatting, if I'm going to note that something's important by making it bold and highlighting it in a bright color like red, in addition to that, or in place of that, put that it's important. So in this example, in the second bullet, I've noted important. Instead, use text for emphasis. So maybe instead is not the appropriate word. Maybe we should say, at least start with using text for emphasis, but certainly you could use formatting as well. It's just, if we're going to note that something's important, for example, then let's use a textual description for that as well, because a screen reader is not going to announce that that there's a color change in the formatting here. And it's a lot of screen readers don't announce that you've used bold or italics or even underline. So if you're using that formatting to demonstrate that emphasis, screen reader users may not be able to catch that emphasis because it's not going to announce a change in that formatting. Another thing to avoid, and this is a hard one for me, I'll be honest, especially when I'm using tools like X or Twitter, and I love creating some graphics using tools like Adobe Illustrator or Canva. But the idea of images with text can be an accessibility issue. And so I'm going to start with the example here on the right. So I have this sticky note graphic. I created this in Canva, and I put some text on there. Meeting scheduled for August 23rd at 4 p.m. But as you know, you may be able to see that that it's kind of pixelated. It's because I zoomed in. So if I'm a user who is having to zoom in on digital content in order to visually access it, text that's on graphics, if it's not a high quality graphic, the text on that image might be difficult to read when I zoom in. So it may become pixelated, kind of like this picture. There's a lot of web tools these days that allow users to zoom in on text without losing any of the, any of the formatting of that text. So I'm able to zoom in and then not have to scroll left to right, or I'm able to zoom in and it's not becoming pixelated. So text is easier to read based on my personal preferences or my disability needs. I'm able to zoom in and be able to access text. That's difficult if I have an image with text on it. So that's one reason to try to avoid images with text. Now, I certainly could add an alt text description to this image, but just at face value, it may be difficult to access that image if I need to zoom in, because in this instance, that image is not high quality enough. Here's another example. This is actually an example I use in some other trainings where we talk about how to test for accessibility. This is an example of how this is actually an image with text on it. And it will actually take you to a website that tells you why this image is completely inaccessible. If I use an automated checker for this image, this is an automated accessibility checker. It's the same checker that we talked about at the very beginning of the session. We were talking about the WebAIM million. Notice it says no errors, no contrast errors. So it gives the impression that everything is perfectly fine with this button that it's an image with text on it. But one of the issues that actually has that the checker doesn't find is that the colors don't have enough contrast. So it's difficult to, even use some automated checkers and expect for it to find that this white text on this blue background is not sufficient. So images with text can oftentimes throw a multitude of accessibility issues. And so as much as possible, we need to avoid images with text on them and instead use text itself rather than examples like this. Now, logo color contrast actually does not have a minimum ratio. So the web content guidelines state that when we're talking about colors within a logo, there's not a minimum requirement. Now, that said, if we want people to be able to recognize and access our logo, probably best for us to do some checking of color contrast to make sure it's easily readable. But at least for WCAG standards, there's not a set requirement. So I came up with this example in Canva. So notice that there's text on top of these larger letters in the background, kind of this monogram, and then it's on this like light pink background. But those HM letters are very similar in color compared to the background. It looks like it's just a darker saturation or brightness. And so if I check the foreground color of the H and the M compared to the background color that's just a lighter shade of that pinkish color, notice it definitely does not meet the minimum contrast ratio. But this would not be a WCAG error. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the WCAG error, it would not be an error because there is not a minimum set for logos. So oftentimes I have districts, PSUs, or even folks at the agency say, well, what about this logo? Because the colors don't there's not enough contrast. Well, for WCAG standards, that's okay. Again, probably best practice to try to make sure our logos are easily readable. In this instance, you can see it was kind of a multi-layered logo, so I see what they're trying to do here. They're trying to make it, visually appealing while also layering 3 layers of color, and so they wanted the black text on top to be what pops out. But something to keep in mind when we're talking about logos is doesn't have to meet a minimum contrast ratio, but certainly be considerate of the colors that you select to make sure that they are user friendly. Now, there are some tools built right into some of the programs that we use. So I've taken a screenshot here where I can actually go in and inspect content without color. So for example, this was a screenshot that I took where this is the menu bar at the top. When I go into Microsoft products, this was a PowerPoint presentation. I can go into review and click on check accessibility. And one of the options that's available is inspect without color. And so I just took a screenshot of the DPI colors and put that into a PowerPoint presentation. Then I selected inspect without color. And this is what it looked like. Now, this might be helpful for a couple of reasons. One, think about our users with visual impairments who may have a color deficiency where they cannot see any colors. Now, that's pretty rare, but certainly could be one of our stakeholders, one of our users is not able to access any color visually. So notice that, of course, our blue and that purplish color are very similar when we turn them into grayscale. Another thing to note is, think about if I have something that I know users are probably going to print. Maybe they're going to have a physical print of this document, or I'm going to print it for my training and have handouts, and I'm going to print them in black and white or in grayscale. Notice that if I'm using those colors to denote something, it's going to be difficult to distinguish between the two. So, of course, the inspecting without color is just another tool to help us visually simulate what that might look like to someone who can't access those colors, either through a visual impairment and or through, printing something in black and white. And I'm not saying don't use these colors. I love our DPI colors, but it's just helping us be cognizant of, are we using color alone to help us share information or to distinguish pieces of information? And if so, then we might need to add a pattern or some text along with it in order to help distinguish easily. The next thing I just wanted to mention is that, for example, in Mac, I have a MacBook Air, and so on the Mac operating system, there are some options to change the display features, of content. So in this instance, I turned on the increased contrast, and I should have put a comparison screenshot here, but what happened was it made sure that that text in that background had a greater contrast, and it also put in darker lines around all of the boxes. So honestly, increasing that contrast is probably something I should leave turned on, especially like if I'm doing some in-person trainings. It might be easier to see that projected screen if I leave that increased contrast on, so that you can easily distinguish between the text, the background, and even the boxes. So there are some built-in accessibility features to help with different color accessibility needs. And I encourage you to take a look at those even personally to see if there's any that would benefit you. Another tool that'll work on building an accessible color palette. Now, again, there's multiple tools out there like this. I put the link in the chat, but this is one that I love to use because I'm able to put in some different colors. So it will, basically start with white to black, and then in between, I'm putting in a light color, a bright color, a medium, and a dark. And so what I've done here is, well, not in this example, this was just the default. There we go. These are the DPI colors. So I took the bright turquoisey color. I know that's not turquoise. I can't think of a good name for it. This purpley wine color, and then that darker navy color. And then I took a lighter shade. I think this was at 20% of that turquoisey color. And then of course the white and the black. And what this website does is let you know what is going to have enough contrast. So it's building out this chart to say if you're going to use bright text, so that bright blue turquoisey color on any of these backgrounds, these are the only two that would meet that minimum contrast. So it's really helpful, especially, I think about our schools that have like their school colors, and then on their website, they're trying to use some of those school colors in text and on the background. And sometimes those 2 or 3 or 4 colors do not have adequate contrast. So I love that tools like this really help kind of set the stage for me, so that I can, use my branding colors, but also be cognizant of which of those colors are going to provide enough color contrast if I use them together. And then all of these that have the grayed out box with the line through do not have that minimum contrast, which makes sense. I mean, white text on a white background, that's a no-go. But even white text on that light turquoise or even on that dark turquoise does not have enough color contrast. So this is a great tool, especially if you are working on some color themes and you're going to be using multiple combinations of these colors with text and background. This color palette builder can help you with that. So that is kind of a wrap up. I know we're about a minute over. That's a wrap up for our session today. I just have added some additional resources here in the slide deck. So information about the new rule that I was talking about, where we have the WCAG standards being set as the bar for accessibility. But I also have a link to my accessibility website where you'll find more information and resources, as well as the recordings for today's webinar. And then I also have a great article that really helps you understand lots of not just accessibility, but kind of usability of color when it comes to data visualization and graphics. So lots of good examples and some suggestions of, what's ideal versus not ideal when it comes to color and data visualizations. Excuse me. And a couple other resources here as well. If you're interested in joining our community of practice, I'll throw that link in the chat. We have just started. We just had our first meeting last week, but would love for any of you to join if you're interested in just growing together. So learning alongside your peers and alongside me as we learn more about how to ensure that we're making content accessible. All right, that's it for me. I'm going to throw the link back in into the chat for today's presentation, and then I'm going to check the chat for questions, and feel free to stay on the call if you have questions and want to chat some more. Otherwise, thanks for joining. All right, so let's see, Laura. Oh, thank you, Laura, for adding this. Laura Weekland, who is our section chief, forgive me, Laura, I'm sure I'm going to butcher your title. She's our section chief for graphic design. Unmute, Laura, and tell me your full title if you can. At the agency in our Office of Communications. She said she wanted to add that DPI's brand team has been working with Andy Baxter on a data visualization guide. Yes, that's right. I'm so glad you said that. It considers all of the points brought up in this presentation, most importantly, not to depend on color alone. Absolutely. We're testing it with the Data Viz user group next week and plan to release it to the agency at large mid to late August. That's fantastic. And I think I love that it's reiterating a lot of the points that we've shared today. Yay. Hex values for the 3 DPI colors. Yes, Amy. Actually, in the, hang on. I thought I had it right here in the presentation too. Yeah. So here are the hex colors for 3 DPI's colors. And Laura's team has the what's the guide that I'm trying to say here? The branding guide, the that has all of the colors and, of course, information about the logos and everything else on our intranet, or on SharePoint. The thank you, Laura, style guide. I don't know why that was I don't know why that was so tough for me today. Thank you, Laura. The hex colors are here. Amy, can you see? Can you visually access those, or I can put those in the chat if you need me to? But those are the three main hex colors for DPIs. But the style guide actually, thank you, Laura. The style guide and the link, Laura just put the link in the chat. The style guide actually has the hex codes as well for all of the various shades of those colors. So kind of divided, I think it was like 20, 40, 60, 80% of these colors that would be great to use as, as kind of supplementary colors in some of the content that we have. All right, let's see if there were any other questions. Good deal, Iris. I'm glad this was beneficial to you. All right, well, that's it for me. Feel free to unmute if you have any questions. Otherwise, I think that's a wrap. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Hopefully, I'll have the webinar recording up by the end of the week.